everyone, and welcome to our video series Sala aula Digital. Today we'll be learning British history for intermediate students. The question is, who are the British? Part 7, the Georgians. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the page. If you want private lessons, please send an email to saladialodigital2020@gmail.com. Shall we begin? This video covers a period of over 100 years from 1714 to 1830. This period is known as the Georgian period because the four kings who ruled Britain were all named George. George I, George II, George III, and George IV. Britain was at war for about 1/3 of this period. Most of the wars were against France. It was a time when the British Navy became very powerful. The British Empire grew as a result of the successes in war. The inventions of machines powered by steam and water made Britain the most manufacturing country in the world. Let's go back. If you remember, Queen Anne had no children when she died in 1714, and the throne was offered to a German prince, George of Hanover, the grandson of James I. George I and George II spent a lot of time in Germany. They did not speak English. Who led the country was a cabinet of powerful members of parliament led by Sir Robert Walpole. George III was a good man, but was not skilled at politics. He felt many members of parliament were dishonest and tried to rule more fairly. George IV led a very wild life. His behavior made him very unpopular with the British people. And George II was interested in farming. He encouraged many improvements in agriculture. Let's return to George IV. He was not successful, and during his reign, Britain lost the American colonies. And Prince Charles Edward, the ambitious grandson of James II, believed that the crown should return to the Stuarts. So what did he do? He invaded England, supported by a French army. But few English supported him, and he had to go back to the Highlands of Scotland. He was pursued by George II's son, the Duke of Cumberland. During Georgian times, British ships traded all over the world. They carried industrial goods to Europe, the Americas, and India. The ships brought back luxuries like silk, sugar, tea, brandy, and tobacco. Many people turned to smuggling to avoid high taxes. And smugglers, who were often fishermen, took cargoes from foreign ships, then brought them ashore secretly. Many smuggling boats had false bottoms where the cargo could be hidden and covered with fish. During the reign of George III, there were great changings in farming. The old medieval system remained, but they were forbidden to graze their animals on the land. So many people had to move to the towns to look for different kinds of work. In 1756, during the reign of George II, war broke out with the French in Canada. Both sides wanted to control the land and the rich fur trade there. But that's when Quebec surrendered and Canada became a British colony. During the reign of George III, the British colonies in America declared their independence from Britain. George III sent an army to put down the rebellion, and the Americans, led by George Washington, forced the British to surrender. And a new country has born, the United States of America, with Washington as its first president. During the Georgian period, industry became very important. This new change in the way people lived and worked was called Industrial Revolution. The main change is a result of the invention of machines to do work that used to be done by hand. These machines were so large that they had to be put in special buildings. Richard Arkwright invented the water frame spinning machine. And for example, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny. And so many changes made clear that more iron was needed. Iron began to be smelted by coal. And as you remember, coal was already used to heat homes and in the brick-making and beer brewing industry. But more coal was needed, and miners began to dig much deeper to get extra coal needed for the growing population and the new industries. And the labor conditions were very poor. Young women dragged the coal along the tunnels. And child labor. Children sat for hours in the dark waiting to open the trapdoors. And then coal had to be carried up long ladders to the surface. And because it was so dark in the mine, the Davy safety lamp was invented in 1815 for the miners to use, which gave them some light to see underneath. Another important discovery was the steam engine, was probably the single most important invention at the time. And James Watt was a scientific instrument maker at Glasgow University. While repairing a steam engine built by another inventor, he realized that he could make improvements to that machine. And so he built the first efficient steam engine in 1769. Steam engines on wheels became the first railway locomotives. And to carry the heavy loads of coal, canals were built. The first canal was built by James Brindley. The canal was so successful that others were soon built to link the industrial areas of the north and the Midlands with London and the big ports. Josiah Wedgwood owned pottery factories. He realized that his delicate pottery could be carried much more safely by canal than on bumpy roads. So, he ordered the construction of another canal from Stoke to the port of Liverpool. And how about the cities? There was a lot of crime in the cities during Georgian Britain. The criminals were hanged in public. During the Georgian period, the population of Britain doubled. And so many people in the city brought diseases. In 1796, Dr. Edward Jenner began to vaccinate people against cowpox. He realized that a small dose of cowpox protected people from the killer disease. Surgeons had to work fast because there was no anesthetics. Most patients die in agony of shock or through infection as there were no antiseptics. Another curious fact is that during this period, gin drinking became very popular. Gin was very cheap. It was advertised as drunk for a penny, dead drunk for 2 pence. It was also very dangerous since it could cause blindness, madness, and even death. Captain James Cook was one of Britain's greatest sailors. He took scientists to visit many lands so that they could study new plants and animals. Captain Cook visited New Zealand and was the first European to land on the coast of eastern Australia. He called that land Botany Bay because there were so many plants and animals. He was killed by Hawaiians in 1779. Now let's look at the plantations. The owners of sugar plantations in the West Indies and Americas needed workers. They began carrying slaves from Africa to America. And ships were loaded with cheap goods like beads, knives, cloth, pots, and pans in ports like Liverpool to pay for their slaves. Slaves were captured by slavers and kept in slave forts until the slave ships arrived. And those slaves were branded, packed onto the ships, and chained in the holds. Slavers were very cruel, and many slaves died from disease or lack of water. So, facing this cruelty, William Wilberforce, a rich friend of the Prime Minister, started a society in 1787 to abolish slave trade. The plantation owners fought this bitterly. They did want slaves. But the Parliament soon realized how horrible slavery was and passed a law abolishing the British slave trade in 1807. But in the colonies, slavery was abolished in 1833. In 1831, there were 24 million people in Britain. Women could not vote. Voters were bribed and bullied into voting a particular way. Many people were demanding a reform of the parliament to make elections fairer. Lastly, the parliament passed a Reform Act. Among other things, this act gave 42 large towns the right to have a member of parliament. It was the first step towards a fairer system. In 1805, the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte had conquered most of Europe. He prepared to cross the Channel to invade Britain. But another important name came across to defend the country, the Admiral Horatio Nelson, and he defeated the French and saved the country. He attacked the French navy off the coast of Spain near Cape Trafalgar. And the battle was a great British victory, but Nelson was killed, and Napoleon had to call off his invasion. In 1815, Napoleon escaped from prison in Italy and raised another army in France. He attacked a small British army led by the Duke of Wellington in Belgium. But Napoleon was defeated in the Battle of Waterloo and surrendered. Napoleon was sent to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he died. And the Victorian age was about to come. Thank you. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe the channel and like the page. Goodbye.